بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. Last week we spoke about the British promise to the Arabs during World War I that the British would support the Arabs in establishing an independent Arab state in exchange for the Arabs revolting against the Ottomans. So the British wanted the Arabs to revolt against the Ottomans because the Ottomans were enemies to the British. So the British thought that they could get Arab support and the Arabs would fight the Ottomans, and that would serve British interests as well. So they promised the Arabs that if you fight the Ottomans, then we will support you in the establishment of an independent Arab state. So this is what the British were telling the Arabs. We also spoke about how during the same time period, while the British were making all of these promises to the Arabs, at the same time, the British and the French were secretly making plans. And they came to an agreement, a secret agreement that is known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement, on how they would divide the Arab lands amongst themselves. So they were hoping the Arabs will revolt against the Ottomans. They'll take care of the Ottomans for us. Then, instead of the Arabs taking that land and making an independent state, the British and the French will divide that land amongst themselves. So they're telling the Arabs one thing, that we're going to let you take that land and you can independently rule that land. But then amongst themselves, the British and the French were making plans on how they would divvy up the Arab lands amongst themselves. The British is going to take this portion and the French are going to take this portion, right? So they came to that secret agreement amongst themselves. They didn't publicize this because they knew that if the Arabs found out about this, then the Arabs may not revolt as the British wanted them to. So they tried to keep this Sykes-Picot Agreement secret. But look how they're playing both sides, right? Now, while all of this was happening, the British were also, at the same time, in secret negotiations with the World Zionist Organization. And they were making negotiations to come to an agreement with the Jews on how to establish a homeland for the Jews in Palestine. They were coming to an agreement with the World Zionist Organization that, yes, once we take control of Palestine, we will allow the Jews to settle here, and we will create a homeland for the Jews on Palestinian land. So the British were promising this to the Jews. So all of these three things were going on at the same time. The British are making promises to the Arabs, they're making agreements with France, and they're also making agreements with the Zionists. All of these three things were going on at the same time. So look at the British. Look at how cunning they were. Look at how deceptive they were. Really, they were only looking out for their own interests, and they were willing to pit different sides against each other in order to gain their own interests. This was the way of the British throughout history, right? And they were really very good at doing this. They were really experts at this type of treachery and betrayal. All right, so now why were the British interested in setting up a state for the Jews in Palestine? Why did they want to do that? Why were they negotiating with the World Zionist Organization and promising them that they will help them set up a Jewish homeland in Palestine? What was the British interest in this? Because remember, the British never do anything for anyone else. They only do whatever they do, it is for their own interests. So what was their interest in setting up a state for the Jews in Palestine? All right. One of the reasons was, first of all, World War I was going on at this time. So the British, during World War I, they were allied with France, Russia, Italy, and Japan against Germany, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire. So the allied forces were Britain, France, Russia, Italy, and Japan. And the central forces that they were fighting against were Germany, Austria, and the Ottoman Empire. Now, initially, the United States of America was not part of World War I, initially. They came into it later, but initially they were not part of World War I. But the British wanted the United States to join. They wanted the United States to join on their side. Now, at that time, there were a number of wealthy Jews who had settled in America, and they had a heavy influence in America. Because of their wealth, they had political influence as well. So the British were hoping that by promising the Jews a homeland in Palestine, they could leverage this influence that the Jews had in America in order to get America to join World War I on their side. So this was one of the reasons why the Jews were interested in helping, why the British were interested in helping the Jews establish a homeland in Palestine. Also, within the British government itself, there were many Zionists in the British government, and not necessarily Jews. There were Christian Zionists in the British government as well. They were not Jewish in terms of their religion, but they supported the Zionist ideology. In fact, the British Prime Minister at that time, Lloyd George, he was a Christian Zionist. Also, the British Foreign Minister, Arthur Balfour, he was also a Christian Zionist. And as for the Interior Minister, the Home Minister, he was a man named Herbert Samuel, and he was actually a Jew, a Jewish Zionist. So a lot of the people in powerful positions in the British Empire, they were Zionists, whether Jewish Zionists or Christian Zionists. So under this influence, the British government agreed with the World Zionist Organization to give them Palestine for them to establish a Jewish homeland in that land. So these were the reasons behind the British wanting to help the Jews set up a homeland in Palestine. All right. Now, during this period, as we mentioned, Russia was also entrenched in World War I. Russia was part of the Allied forces, right? So the Russians were fighting against the Germans on one front, and they were fighting against the Ottomans on the other front. But during World War I, some internal events took place in Russia that had a major effect on the situation and on Russia's participation in World War I. In October of 1917, Vladimir Lenin was able to establish a communist state and overthrow the Russian government. And because of wanting to focus on internal issues in Russia after this, right after Lenin overthrew the Russian government, he wanted to organize things within Russia and consolidate his power. So how could he do that? How could he deal with the internal issues in Russia while at the same time having Russia involved in World War I? So Lenin decided to withdraw Russia from World War I, right? So that was the situation of Russia. Now also around this same period, also in 1917, and we mentioned this briefly last week, the British military officer T.E. Lawrence, more well known as Lawrence of Arabia, he took an army consisting of a number of unorganized Arab tribes, and they were able to conquer Aqaba. And Aqaba is a city which is in modern-day Jordan, but it is considered a gateway for access from Egypt into Palestine and Sham. So when they conquered Aqaba, that became a means of access to Palestine and Sham from Egypt. So after taking Aqaba, Lawrence of Arabia informed the British commander, General Edmund Allenby, and he was stationed in Cairo. So when General Allenby in Cairo was informed that Lawrence of Arabia, along with these Arabs, have conquered Aqaba, he was very happy, and at the same time he was shocked and surprised. He didn't realize that this would happen so quickly and so easily. But he was very pleased that now the doors to the Holy Land are open. Now access from Egypt into Palestine and Sham, it is open. So after the capture of Aqaba, the British army under the command of General Allenby and the Arabs under the command of Sharif Faisal ibn Hussein. Sharif Faisal ibn Hussein was the son of Sharif Hussein ibn Ali. Sharif Hussein ibn Ali was the leader of the Arabs. So his son, Sharif Faisal ibn Hussein, he was the main commander of the Arab army. So after the capture of Aqaba, the British army under the command of General Allenby and the Arab army under the command of Sharif Faisal ibn Hussein, they raced to enter Sham, right? Because now neither side really trusts each other. So the British want to be the first to enter Sham, and the Arabs also want to be the first to enter Sham. So both armies entered Palestine, and then they both headed towards Syria, and they ended up reaching Damascus on the same day. The British army and the Arab army reached Damascus in Syria on the same day. All right, now the Arabs, as we mentioned, they were promised an independent state by the British. But it became clear now that the British had other plans. They had no intention of keeping their promise to the Arabs. And on November 2nd, 1917, the British Foreign Minister, Arthur Balfour, he issued the infamous Balfour Declaration. And in this declaration, he said, His Majesty's government, meaning the government of England, the King's government, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So with this Balfour Declaration, the British are officially showing their support for the establishment of a Jewish homeland on Palestinian land. So this was a great betrayal to the Arabs, and the treachery of the British became even more clear for everyone to see. The next month, after the Balfour Declaration was November of 1917, the next month, December of 1917, the British military entered and occupied Jerusalem. They entered and occupied Jerusalem, and General Allenby made a very evil statement when his army came and occupied Jerusalem. General Allenby said, "Now the Crusades have finally ended." Now today the Crusades have finally ended, right? So this was the statement of General Allenby when the British army occupied Jerusalem in December of 1917. So of course, the Arabs were extremely angry at this betrayal. And after this, negotiations took place between General Allenby and Sharif Faisal ibn Hussein, but these negotiations really didn't yield any results. But still, the British were not done playing their games. They're still playing their games. The British told Sharif Faisal that you can go ahead and announce an independent Arab state. Just like we promised you, you can make your announcement of an independent Arab state, and Damascus can be your capital. Damascus in Syria would be the capital of the Arab state. And we, the British, we will stand behind you and we will support you in establishing this independent Arab state. This is what the British told Sharif Faisal ibn Hussein. But at the same time, the British, they were secretly making a deal with France, because France actually wanted Syria and Lebanon. France wanted Syria and Lebanon. So the British are promising that to Sharif Faisal ibn Hussein, that you guys, you can have Syria, you can have Lebanon, and we will support you. But behind their backs, the British were making a secret deal with France, and the British told the French that, look, we will withdraw our support. We'll quietly withdraw our support for the Arab ruler, Sharif Faisal ibn Hussein, and you can go ahead and invade Syria and invade Lebanon and occupy those lands and take it away from the Arabs, and we will not get involved. So the British are promising Sharif Faisal ibn Hussein that we will support you in establishing your state. You can have Damascus as your capital, and we will stand behind you. But then at the same time, they're telling France, you can go ahead and occupy those Arab lands, and we will not get involved at all. We will not help the Arabs. So look at this betrayal once again of the British. Look at them playing both sides once again for their own interests. The British, they wanted to get rid of the Arab problem, right? So they thought that, look, instead of fighting the Arabs ourselves, let's have France do it for us, right? So that is what they decided to do. So you can see how the British how they were experts at treachery and experts at betrayal. They were really, really good at this, right? So Sharif Faisal ibn Hussein, he became suspicious of what was going on, right? He knew that, the British are cooking something up. So the British noticed that Sharif Faisal was getting uncomfortable. So to ease his mind, to ease the mind of Sharif Faisal ibn Hussein and to ease the mind of the Arabs, Britain and France announced a joint declaration between Britain and France on November 7th, 1918. They issued what is known as the Anglo-French Declaration on November 7th, 1918. And in this declaration, they promised the Arabs freedom and independence, that you will have your freedom, you will have your independence, you don't have to worry about anything. We're not plotting behind your backs, right? But this was all just part of their games. This was all just part of their games, right? The British were the main players in this game, and the French were playing games as well. So by the end of the year 1918, World War I came to an end. So when World War I came to an end, the landscape of the world changed, right? The Arab world was colonized after World War I. The Ottoman Empire was in shambles. And the Zionist influence on the world strengthened. It became stronger after World War I. France occupied Syria and Lebanon. France was able to occupy Syria and Lebanon, and Britain took control of Palestine. And the British allowed the Jews to freely come and migrate and settle in Palestine and establish their homeland in Palestine. And General Allenby announced that Palestine is for the Jews. This land is a land for the Jews, right? So that is what the situation in the Holy Land looked like after World War I. That's what the situation in the Holy Land looked like after World War I. So inshallah, we'll stop there for today, bi'idhnillah, and inshallah next week we will continue with the history of the Holy Land, bi'idhnillah. Jazakumullahu khayra wa barakallahu feekum. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If you got a car downstairs in the basement, please move it because we're getting ready to close the basement. Barakallah feekum. If you have a car downstairs in the basement, please move it. We are getting ready to close the basement. Jazakum Allah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.